Another demonstration of the Fraud Toolbox toolbar is these identifying statistically significant transactions, vendor analysis, and the quick stats. And what I'd like to do now is I'm going to do a short demonstration on each of these. And to do that, what I'll do is open up my test data that I have here. And again, this is some test data that I just put together. It's not a very large data set, but again, it's a good demonstration of what these macros can do. And the larger the demonstration, or the larger the data set, the better these macros are able to reduce the amount of time that you need to spend to find the transactions, pull them out, research them, and figure out what's going on. And with that, I'll do a quick stats transaction here. And what we'll do is we're going to select a range of data. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to choose these numbers as my data to highlight. So F2 through F156. These are all the options that I can do with this data set. I can do a count, an average, standard deviation, median, max and min, the upper and lower quartile, the sum, the absolute sum, and it provides a nice summary of what all your data is and what it looks like. You can see the standard deviation can be used to identify some of those outlying transactions. The upper and lower quartile can be used to help identify those outlying transactions as well. Your sum and your absolute sum can help you try to figure out whether you've got all positive or negative numbers there, but it will also help with your identifying your statistically significant transactions. But so these are just quick stats, and it saves it in a new worksheet called quick stats. And if you wish to save it, go ahead and rename it. Otherwise, next time you run it, it'll overwrite it. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to the original sheet, and here's statistically significant transactions, and we're going to choose the same data range here. So I had F2 through F156. And what I want to do is I want to highlight these transactions that are greater than, that are statistical outliers. So we know from statistics that 99.9% of your transactions should be plus or minus 4 standard deviations away. So what we can do is we can look for things that are over 4 standard deviations. Those will be your significant outliers. And we can do the upper and lower quartile. We can do both if you want, or just the lower. In this case, let's just do the lower. We can change the highlight color if you want. In this case, I'm just going to leave it the same, but by having 2 different highlight colors, we can identify which transactions have been highlighted and why. Some transactions might be highlighted by both, in which case there will be the second iteration through this macro will be the upper and lower quartile, so they'll change to this orange color instead of yellow. But so with that, we'll go ahead and hit go, and we're going to highlight those transactions, and now we can go through and we can see that $365 debit transaction for Bank of America is one of the transactions. Another Bank of America for $387 is another transaction. Bank of America, you can start to see the pattern here that some of these transactions are going to be credit cards, and it looks like rent and some phone expenses. So there's your lower quartile. It looks like all of them are lower quartile. So with that being said, it doesn't sound like many of them were statistically significant in terms of a standard deviation. Let's do this again, and this time let's choose a little bit different standard deviation to see where we end up. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to not do the lower quartile this time. I'll just do standard deviation. Let's go all the way down to 2, highlight color of yellow, and let's see what we come up with. And there you can see that it highlights some of these transactions that are over z-score of 2 or over 2 standard deviations. So this would be in your third standard deviation, which should encompass 97% of your transactions. So you can look at these and try to figure out why these transactions are out there and what the nature of the transactions are. Okay, and for let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and clear all the highlights from everything. Go back to the toolbar. Now for individual vendor analysis, I think this is a nice tool to be able to look individually at a vendor. If something pops up and you want to say, let's look at just that person. And it says vendor analysis, but it can be anything that uses any sort of description. So with that being said, let me just demonstrate this real quick. So here's the payee column. What we're going to do is this is the column that can that we're going to use to sort and group by, and this column can be any of these transactions if you wish. So we could click here, and what it would do is group by each of these different descriptions, or we could group by, or we could click here and it would go by each person and how much they have approved and so forth. And so for this we're going to go ahead and use the person's name. So I'll click OK. What I'll automatically do is it's automatically going to populate this drop down list, and you can go down here and just look very quickly and see that indeed it has populated that drop down list with all the different unique vendors or people here. So Bob, Mary, Brian, Bridget, Joey, Michael, and it puts it in alphabetical order. So we can quickly say, well, let's look at what Mary did. So now we want to look at the date column. We just choose our date column and we choose our amount column. And what we're going to do is we're going to run some analysis on all these transactions that involve Mary. So we'll hit go, and what we're going to end up with is the details for Mary on a separate worksheet. And you can see here that indeed it did pull up all the transactions that have to do with Mary. And so we can go through there, and it puts a graph at the bottom so we can see how all these transactions shake out and what the time frame is. You can see as we go through this timeline, as we get later in the years here, the transactions jump up quite a bit. So we might want to look at that and say, why did the transactions jump so much? We can see very quickly looking at this, because she starts to be the person that's paying for rent in the office, and that's why. And that may be very legitimate reason for that jump. But here again is a summary page which will quickly tell you all the transactions that she's involved with. So it counts 62 transactions, and we can go back here and we can look and see indeed there are 62 transactions. The total amount of the transactions, the standard deviation, the average. Again, we could go back here, highlight the column, and it'll tell us down here. So our average is 33781, and we have 338 rounded up here. And we can see the maximum payment, the minimum payment, the first date, and the last date. These can all help to identify, for instance, if Mary happened to have been fired from the company on somewhere in the middle of 2012, this last payment date that she approved should be that in the middle of 2012 and not the last date there. So that can help quite a bit to help identify some transactions that you may be interested in. I'll show you another way of doing this now. And this time I'm going to choose the description column. And in here I'm going to look for, here's all my different descriptions. I'm going to look for rent for the, say for the Omaha office. And here's my date column. And here's my amount column. And what I'll get is a summary of rent as well, and you can see the different people that paid for the rent. You'll see the different amounts. They're all the same amount, which if your rent doesn't change, that should be a good thing, that all your amounts are the same. Again, we'll look over the summary here, and you'll see that there's 12 transactions, the total amount, and the standard deviation, of course, should be 0 if all the amounts are the same. And the payments start the 1st and end on December 1st. So that seems like a good thing to have as far as the rent goes. But let's do this one more time. Again, we're going to choose this. And this time, let's choose Denver office, date column, amount column. We'll go and we'll see what we come up with. And here you can see, again, the amounts are all the same, which is a good thing. On the summary, we have 12, which is a good thing. We've got, starts on the 1st, ends in December, and the standard deviation is 0. So again, shows us that everything that we expect. If, for instance, we look here and our rent is 13, we're going to have to go back and investigate why there's 13 rent payments in a year. It may be that you paid ahead at the end of the year. You were trying to move some expenses into the current year. It may be that there's a transaction out there that shouldn't be there, and you need to go investigate why. That's our individual vendor analysis. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do a complete vendor analysis, which I think is a really nice way of looking at this just as a starting point. But we can click on this, and again, you'll see very similar options here, but the payee column, let's go ahead and do this. Description column. The date column, we'll choose our date column, and our amount column, we'll choose our amounts. And we can choose to save the individual vendor details, so we'll create a vendor detail worksheet for each of the individual vendors. We could do it all at once if you want. I wouldn't click on it if you literally have thousands of vendors, because you'll end up with thousands of spreadsheets and it may crash Excel. But again, I would do it without it at first. Identify the vendors that may have some questionable activity, and then go back and look at those vendors individually. And we can say the original data has a header row here, so it kind of takes that out of the equation. What we've done now is it creates a vendor summary right here, and you can go through and see all these different transactions. So you can see our auto expense. There are 12 transactions for auto expense. Here's what the total amount is for auto expense, the first payment date and last payment date. A cellular phone expense, again, if you pay it once a month, that's what you should have. 12 payments, first and last. Credit cards, we've got 13 credit card payments and 13 gas and water payments. Again, it's not indicative of anything necessarily being wrong, but you might want to go back and see why it is so that you have 13 payments. And you can see here it's the January through December, and for gas and electric, again, it's January through December. So somewhere in there you've got extra payments in both of those categories. You might want to look and see what those extra payments are. And again, you got healthcare and other things that we have looked at. And that's just a short demonstration of how you can use the vendor analysis and the statistically significant transactions features of Fraud Toolbox to help identify suspicious transactions. Again, please visit my website at fraudtoolbox.com. Please register there for the latest releases and updates. And thank you again.